Hello, everybody. Welcome to the weekend edition of Nightlight Astrology. I'm Alex Amorosi here with Alexandra Blair and Whitney Kranz, and we are going to go over, I think, somewhat of a more fun topic today. We're going to talk about Jupiter, which we have not talked about in a very long time, but we're going to make a whole episode today based on Jupiter's moving through Cancer over the next year and how is sort of stitching together a part of the zodiac that has been deeply affected by Mars in the beginning of the year. But before we get into it, as Adam likes to say, please go to nightlightastrology.com for all your nightlight astrology needs. If you would like to take one of Adam's classes, go on his awesome looking retreat, which by the way, I looked on his website. I was like, that looks amazing. The retreat, like,
Seriously.
seriously amazing.
So beautiful.
And hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Um, we're just so grateful to be here and that Adam has given us this platform to interact with you guys. So just, it's really wonderful to support his work and his channel. We've all benefited from it greatly. So without further ado, the beginning of the year, if you guys didn't know, was colored by Mars. You probably heard about it everywhere you went. Even when you weren't watching astrology, people were probably being like, have you heard about Mars and how it colors the entire year? So it was a very, very powerful, very, let's just say, rocky beginning to the year astrologically. What has just happened in the middle of this week that we're recording, so this is in the last week of August, was Jupiter has now moved officially into the degrees on which Mars was doing its retrograde. This, I think, is going to feel really, really nice. So let me just draw up the chart here. We'll take a look. So Mars is retrograde. Now, again, you guys have probably heard tons about Mars. You've gone over it. We're not going to go over the whole path and take you all the way back through the beginning of the year. Just show you that Mars's path of retrograde was from 17 degrees of Cancer up through 6 degrees of Leo. Jupiter moved on to 17 Cancer last Wednesday and is now going to be traversing this part of the zodiac from now up through the end of next July, so July 31st of 2026. I'm thinking about this and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, you guys, as something that looks very hopeful from a sort of technical astrology point of view. Mars was kind of tearing into the fabric of this part of Cancer over the course of the very end of 2024 and all the way basically up through the beginning of 2025. Jupiter comes in and does the exact opposite. So what Mars was cutting apart, or Mars was making feel more unsafe, or Mars was making feel kind of like dramatic, or even kind of kind of like poking and prodding at a very sensitive part of the zodiac. Jupiter comes in with this very cohesive energy that feels like it's starting to sew things back together. And Jupiter also, in addition to that point, is going to really start to take over a much more powerful role here at the end of the year. You can see today on September 1st when we're recording, Jupiter is now responsible for Saturn for the next 4 months. Saturn's moved back into Pisces. Neptune will join Saturn in October. Jupiter is also in a superior aspect. So whenever you're looking, for those of you that are studying astrology, whenever you're looking at a chart, the planet to the right has the superior aspects of the planets to the left. It's exerting its influence on the planets to the left. So basically, all the inner planets are going to be under a superior influence from Jupiter from the rest of the year as they move through Libra, as they move through Scorpio, and then when they move into Sagittarius, they'll be under Jupiter's rulership. Saturn and Neptune are under Jupiter's rulership. The moral of the story is Jupiter takes on a much more expansive and much more powerful role as we move into October, November, and December. Does that mean everything's perfect all of a sudden? No, but it does, I think, provide a much more buoyant feeling and a pretty healing feeling, especially considering going over Mars's path. What do you guys think?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important to note that feeling of buoyancy and support is echoed as particularly the planets go through Scorpio, late Scorpio. It's like Mars, Mercury, the Sun, Venus. Mercury actually does even a retrograde from early Sagittarius back to late Scorpio. And so there is a series of like water trines where Jupiter is trining that stuff in Scorpio. The stuff in Scorpio is trining Saturn in Pisces, then Neptune in Pisces. It starts in mid October and it goes all the way kind of through mid December. So I feel like that buoyancy and that support from the exalted Jupiter is honestly pretty sweet. I totally agree with you, Alex. I think that it's very different than what was happening with Mars in Cancer, which felt inflammatory, particularly in the body. Like I heard from a lot of clients and friends about so much
Mm,
inflammation and physical, just like stress in the body in Cancer. Um, I think that's actually interesting. You pointed out that Mars, started retrograding at 6 Leo, which Mars had that weird inflammatory, aggressive stuff going on in Leo too, even though it's kind of happy in Leo, but we had those two Pluto oppositions across Leo and Aquarius as well. So what Mars did this year, very unique. I keep calling that like in Peaky Blinders, like the bleak midwinter. That's how I'm thinking about what that was. And now, one thing I just wanted to comment on, in addition to all of that, is that I think what I've been hearing from a lot of friends and clients is some disgruntledness about Jupiter. Like, I think people are not sure about their relationship with Jupiter. And Jupiter is one of those planets that is not always kind, sunshine, daisies, sweetness, and beauty. Like, especially around that Venus Jupiter conjunction, I was just hearing from so many people, hey, nothing incredible happened to me. Why did every astrologer say something incredible was going to happen to me? And so, your point about coalescing, though, I think is really brilliant, Alex, because even if it's not that Jupiter comes in and you just get lucky and you get money and you get support coming out of the woodwork, it's like what Mars was doing was like this chaotic, boundless, inflammatory thing that was sort of like making our vision wavy. Whereas Jupiter, maybe it's not bringing in that abundance that we like to think of for Jupiter, but it is coalescing and it is making our problems and what's going on in our life more visible for us and actually bringing it into focus. Like, I feel like that's been a major feature of Jupiter in Cancer so far. What are you thinking, Whitney?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you literally took the notes right from my little notepad over here because I this year have also I think we've all experienced, well, I won't say us all, but I think many of us have experienced sort of that little Jupiterian letdown maybe that Alexandra you were mentioning, right? Like we expect this big beautiful disco ball of glittering wonder. And here we are, really Jupiter is almost like presenting a magnifying glass in this area, right? We're also fairly early in this Jupiter journey. In November, Jupiter is going to station retrograde, right? Still in Cancer and still going through and that gives us a perspective of sort of where we are in this lesson. I mean, I don't think I can add a whole lot to the Mars in Cancer story. I think you've both told that story beautifully. But I think that for many of us, right, if Cancer is this place of nurturance and care, that Mars in that place maybe brought up some themes of scarcity, right? Scarcity around how we can care for ourselves and those around us. And even some of these like unconscious behaviors associated with that scarcity. And so it's exactly right. Like Jupiter supporting and healing that work right now? Or like right now on September 1st or September 6th when the world is listening to it to this, or is Jupiter magnifying more than anything? Like I think what we're looking at, because it's Jupiter, is through this lens of optimism, right? But we know we got to do the work first, right? And so that's why this is magnifying this area and presenting this for us, right? Like the magnifying glass to the unconscious behaviors that may have been drudged up through Mars in Cancer.
I really love these points, you guys, because I feel like when you hear, especially when you study a lot of astrology, you hear the greater benefic in Jupiter. Like, I feel like when you study ancient astrology, everybody's mad if they don't have Jupiter in Sagittarius. They're like, my life is screwed if I don't have Jupiter in Sagittarius because that's the strongest Jupiter or whatever. And I will assure you, I've seen plenty of charts with Jupiter in Sagittarius with some pretty tough stuff that has happened to people. It doesn't always mean subjectively amazing experiences, but it does often mean more order, trying to making sense of things, tying things together. It can also, I think it can also lead to gains, but remember also that Jupiter's entrance into Cancer was deeply colored by the square to Saturn in Aries. And there's something to me about that too. It was just occurring to me this morning as I was thinking about, recording this with you guys, of how I think the gains that we have with Jupiter this year are also equal to or proportional to the things that we're willing to lose or let go of with Saturn. There's something about a sort of seesaw relationship there that I was kind of seeing in my mind intuitively of like Saturn is bringing you to the limit of something. And just like Jupiter isn't always bringing you, the gift bag all the time, or at least not the gift bag you thought. Saturn isn't always taking the gift bag away. Sometimes Saturn is showing the limit of something. It's saying this has reached its end. This has to end in order for this new coherent, more orderly beginning to start. And what I'm also thinking of too is Mars in Cancer also breaks down for me into a general feeling of feeling unsafe in places that should feel safe,
Mm-hmm.
feeling on edge in places you shouldn't have to feel on edge. I think that's one of the reasons, we were associated with tough stuff that's happened in families or in childhood. There's certain places where you would hope that you would have the support and nurturance that you would need, but sometimes and often we don't get. And Jupiter to me is a little bit of that, at least either making sense of those experiences, whether they are actual experiences or like you were saying, Alexandra, like something in the body that was inflamed that you begin to understand it more now or make sense of it more, or an actual trauma or something that had come up or was brought to the surface around that time. One of the most important aspects of that healing is making meaning and making sense. And maybe even working with people to help that happen. And I wonder if Jupiter is helping us in a feeling of safety, not necessarily in this way of just like, well, everything just is perfectly externally perfect all of a sudden. But like, I'm beginning to make sense of, or meaning of, or understanding of something that had come up at the beginning of the year. But those are
Mm-hmm.
just some things that are coming up around that for me too.
No, I absolutely agree because Mars, in pretty much all my client work, I love talking about Mars. Mars is the type of planet that is an affliction, especially if you don't give Mars an outlet in your life. If you have a healthy outlet for your Mars, Mars is not happening to you. It's part of what you're doing in the world. But Mars in an unhappy, like bouncing around in Cancer, I think at the time on our monthly overview, Whitney, we talked about it. We were like, it's like getting a shipment of pillows, but there's like a knife somewhere in the box of pillows. You're just like, oh, I don't want that, and it feels like an affliction. It doesn't always feel like there's some causality. It doesn't always feel like there's a reason for things that are happening to you. And sometimes bad things happen to good people when a planet like Mars is in a place like Cancer. That doesn't mean that the same can't be true for Jupiter, but Jupiter feels like if we as astrologers see that Jupiter is in play, you can almost always say like, hey, there's something happening for the greater good. There's some faith here, there's some tie here. This isn't just madness happening for madness sake. Like if somebody tells me, something really difficult happened to them and Mars is at play, sometimes it's just straight up an affliction that's happening to you. Um, Something else I was thinking about that Mars and Cancer time was that it had this quality of like feral, like clawing, trying to grasp and claw our way into joy. Like this winter, I kept hearing this word desiccated from people, like we're just so dehydrated and hopeless feeling during that winter time, especially that full moon in Cancer that happened,
Mm.
let's say like January 13th or 15th. Might have been
Yeah.
13 or 15 degrees though, but that was the peak. That was when that Mars retrograde was the closest to Earth. And it was so visible in the night sky. And there was just this feral sense of like fighting your way back to something or like fighting for hope. And now I feel like there is also something quite analogously feral about Jupiter in Cancer. So a lot of people are saying, like, oh, it's the goddess energy. For me, I think about like Zeus as being this like wild animal, sometimes literally a wild animal, and like the jealousy feelings and the power and being a conduit and the lightning. It's a very empowered flip of that same function, which is like, "Urgh." And when Mars was in Cancer, it was like clawing in the dirt. And now that Jupiter is there, it's kind of like amassing this sort of like lightning power. And it feels just as potent, but possibly, quite possibly, much more constructive. And like there's possibly an optimistic outcome for what's going on there.
Oh my gosh, I love, Alexandra, that you brought Zeus into the conversation. Obviously, Zeus is Jupiter, and the sign of Cancer, the sign of the moon, this is Artemis's realm. Artemis is the daughter of Zeus. Artemis is in herself a wild woman. She's protectively fierce, right? And so there's something to that energy. It's like when Zeus and Artemis get together, it's like wild, it's like lightning, right? And I really appreciate the conversation around what Mars was doing there in Cancer and the desiccation of it, right? Because this chart I have with Mars moving through Cancer, it was like a tear in the dam. Like it was like water leaking out, right? And the the ground then is just soaked dry because the dam has been burst, right? And so Jupiter is like coming into repair that, to patch the dam, right? And I can't help but see that with Jupiter in this trine relationship right now to Saturn and soon Neptune when Neptune retrogrades back into Pisces. That is that like mending the dam, being able to contain maybe a well of emotions or the feeling of loss that we had while Mars was in Cancer. I mean, I'm just saying the same thing, right? We're putting it all back together, and I can't help but notice that Saturn and Neptune are such a part of this. Like I mentioned it earlier, but when Saturn retrogrades too in the middle of November, that's happening in an exact trine with Saturn and Neptune. And it's part of those, what we talked about earlier, these massive water trines that start occurring in mid-October. And it just makes for like a beautiful sense of creativity of what we're now able to bring forth in this area.
I love that because it's like, the water trines. So if we're setting this up here, friends, this is October 22nd. You can see Jupiter will be trining Mars and Mercury will in Scorpio, and they will be trining Saturn, and very, very widely Neptune and Pisces. So they're forming this beautiful grand water trine here. And I think like creativity is so interesting to bring up, Whitney, because also it's like emotional creativity, which we would call in the water signs, right? This
Mm-hmm.
realm of feeling and emotion often is sometimes the only way to express something. In other words, like, we've talked a lot in the last few episodes about Mercury and analyzation and thought and rationality and, discernment and all of those things that are sort of the function of the psychological rational mind. But we're getting into territory in the fall where things are expressed more in dreams, more in art, more in music. There's certain things like I remember when I was starting composition classes in college, classical music composition classes, there were certain things at that point in my life I could only express musically. I didn't have the vocabulary and I didn't have the emotional maturity yet to express, especially the darker feelings and the stuff that was really kind of running under the surface. And I feel like, one of the we make sense of things in a lot of ways. And with these grand water trines, they're going to start to arise over the course of October. there feels to me an opportunity. Like the shadow of that Mars retrograde is long, but it also brought up things that may not have been able to be necessarily analytically or cognitively understood. It may require some level of like some kind of art therapy, whether it's an actual art therapy or it's just doing art for yourself, or it's some kind of creativity that flows more from the space of it just feels right to express this. This color just feels right. This note just feels right. Even just writing this poem feels right. I don't know where it's coming from. That's the feeling I get with these grand water trines, and particularly with Jupiter sort of heading them up in a lot of ways, making sense of that. Because Jupiter will be trining Mars, and Mars in one of its home signs in Scorpio at that point. And there's something to me there about over this fall into December, like this continual handoff between from Mars to Jupiter. And this feels like a significant moment of that, but of coming from a place that's much less much more conceptual and a little less specific.
Yeah, it's definitely more intuitive than intellectual, which is interesting because these water trines, of course, follow those air trines. And to some extent, that air trine situation is going to be active for quite some time. And we're coming up on the period this year where Pluto and Uranus are the closest they get to that trine before it perfects next summer. So it is, there's an interesting interplay. I don't know that it's tension because it's all aversion between the water and the air spots. So it just feels like an interplay in some ways between our intellect and our intuition. But Alex, you're talking about using colors and your intuition in this way and using art and creativity. I think there's also a social knowledge when I think about the water signs, especially with Saturn at play. I always think about, and I talk to clients about Saturn for women as being related to like the three chapters of womanhood, mother, maiden, crone, archetypally. And women in particular experience menopause. So women have a biological function that isn't just childbearing, rearing, and they actually have a function. We have a function that is like carrying wisdom into the last third of our life. And that is our job. And so for me, when I look at this and I see all this water, especially with like the stuff, the transits are moving through Scorpio. The slow planets are in the other places, slowing it down to that Scorpio still water level. The fast planets are in Scorpio. So it actually feels like there's like a movement happening there. And so I think a lot about ancestry and ancestor work. I hear a lot from people like, I don't even know how to get started with ancestor work, which I can totally empathize with. And when I started doing that, I had no sense of how I was connected to anyone before me further back than my grandma. I have one grandma, you know, and that's actually just how I started. I just put up a picture of my grandma and she loves Diet Coke. So sometimes I would just put a Diet Coke next to the picture. And like, that's how I started. And now I have this whole like ancestral practice. That's a part of what I do. So I'm kind of thinking of that too, like dredging up that wisdom. Particularly it's like a feminine watery wisdom in this archetypal way, again, not necessarily in an explicitly gendered way, but I think that's really coming up here for me too.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I love how you speak to our ancestral lineages with this. I think that right now, in a time of so much change, I mean, progress, of course, we can see the progress that is happening in the world right now, like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at a time when we are looking into the future and seeing all of our infinite possibilities, it's so beautiful when we can tap into that water, tap into that wisdom, and ground ourselves back into those practices. Like I love that you bring that up, and it makes me smile because it's something that I didn't plan to discuss at all, but like there's a reason why when I talk about my gods, I say my personal pantheon, because who sits in my personal pantheon? My grandmother, my great grandmother. And I think about the experiences that these people went through in their lives, and I mean, I won't go into it here, but there's some crap in the past, the things that were done to women who did not follow the normal path, right? We all are aware of this, and I think that as we look forward, Jupiter in this situation, in this watery trine, is helping us move into it with that sense of past that we take into our hopes and our dreams and our trust and our belief, right? It helps us integrate and reconcile all those lessons that we've been learning.
Because, and Cancer is so much a sign of ancestry and family, and the importance, and often the importance of that, or something that happened within, if there's an affliction to the sign, then there's something within that that disrupted it or made it, you know, difficult in some way, great or small. And I think that I just love where you guys are going with this because I feel like there's such a there's such a tendency sometimes, I think, to be very linear forward about healing. Like I'm going from this place where I am to this place in the future where I will be healed, and not realizing, like one of my energy work teachers years ago would teach me, she taught me so much, it like blew my mind. She's like, healing is really multidirectional. It's something that goes forward and backward in time and also radiates out into the now. And I think that there's something powerful here about being able to express oneself in ways one might not have been able to, or your ancestors may not have been able to. That I think, in ancestral healing, there's sometimes you're healing aspects of yourself that have been influenced by ancestors that could not do or could not be in a position to heal or work through or have the means to do that, what you can right now. But there's something that you honor in them when you do that when you do that kind of healing yourself. There's something, if you're able to, that it radiates in a lot of directions. And I think that you could see that maybe as a little bit of a stretch, but you could see that as part of Jupiter too, that Jupiter expands that, Jupiter radiates that, Jupiter exudes. What Saturn pulls into itself, Jupiter exudes. And I'm wondering too what you guys think as we get later into the year, we get up into mid-December, there will be a period of time, just a few days, where Jupiter is then hosting all of the inner planets. So Mercury, Venus, the Sun, and Mars all in Sagittarius and in Jupiter's home sign of Sagittarius. That'll be for a couple days around from like December 11th up to probably about December 16th. But there will be a period of time where all of those planets are moving through Sagittarius, hosted by Jupiter. And I really, it makes me think of this idea of the beliefs and the stories that we tell and that we're told. And sometimes they're consciously told through family and ancestry, and sometimes they're unspoken. And when you're doing energy work with ancestry, a lot of times you'll discover that there were sort of unspoken beliefs, unspoken rules, or unspoken philosophies that were handed through the family, or a specific side of the family, or a specific gender of the family that haven't actually come to light. And when you bring them to light and you see them, you see how they've had effect on you and people, in your past, there's an opportunity to change or rewrite the script in some way. And I'm wondering, not just on these few days happening in December, but I think Jupiter having now basically all the planets except for the moon and Uranus and Pluto under its sort of rulership for these days, there's an opportunity of kind of rewriting something or re-understanding something that feels pertinent to ancestry and family, that sort of thing.
Definitely. Alex, I think you tied something together that Whitney was talking about too. Like Whitney, you were talking about zooming in, and is the most basic function I have seen astrologically of Jupiter that we can rely on. Like, you can't always say good with Jupiter. Can't we say this? You can always say it's going to make something bigger. Every time you see a Jupiter transit, whatever it's touching is going to be bigger. And if that's tough in your chart, it's going to be big tough. And if it's great in your chart, it's going to be big great. And that is like the personal natal work everybody needs to do. Like, do you have a night chart? Jupiter might be a little more challenging and, look into that stuff. But you also touched on something really interesting when you talk about clearing out family karma or ancestral stuff. Like, it sounds so good when we say it like that. I'm going to clear out my family's karma. Like, we never think of the work of that. We never think of the crisis and the drudgery and the reckonings and the dark, dark, dark nights wading through that stuff that is required. We just think like, yeah, I want to clear out my family's karma. And that is why people struggle with Jupiter, where you think, yeah, I want to have more faith. I want to have more connection to the gods. I want to have more spiritual awakenings. And you don't think about all the like sweaty, crazy nights where you're just like having terrifying dreams and having those crises that lead to that stuff. Um, and I think that's really important. And your question about the Sagittarius period, I just love that. I always think about babies that are going to be born around that time. I'm like, I actually think that aversion between Sagittarius and Cancer might be helpful because, too much like too jovial becomes a jovial person, but that would be like a person armed with jovial weapons, like pointed directly at their family's karmic history. It's like actually like a helpful aversion, I think.
Oh my God, I love that. It's funny because when you pulled this up, I was like, now that is a solar return. Whose birthday is this? And then I
Yeah.
looked at December 12th. I was like, oh, that's one of my ex's birthdays.
Oh, nice.
Well, we'll
No,
be tying up
not,
some karma with that, Whitney.
nope. That is firmly in the
Yeah.
past. Not so nice. But what you're showing here actually is reoccurring throughout all of these deep winter signs over the next few months, like December through February. It's wild. All of these planets, I mean, we know they follow the sun, but this alignment continues where we have these stelliums recurring in Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, right? And isn't it interesting when we look at the rulers of those signs that we are focusing so much both Jupiterian and Saturnian energy in those houses of our charts, and it really describes what is all happening here with these sort of new formations that we are working through, whether healing old wounds, right, and growing in the right direction. It's all this work of Jupiter and Saturn, who, hey, are still over there engaged in a trine. So it's
Hmm.
working.
Yeah, it was interesting you say that, Whitney, because I really had this intuition this morning that like whatever Jupiter is doing right now is directly proportional to what Saturn's doing. Jupiter
Mhm.
has the upper hand because Saturn is in Jupiter's home of Pisces for the next 4 months. So I think Jupiter has the sort of enveloping um, energy around that. But there's something about in watching what we're saying here about the end of the year where all these planets now will go into Capricorn under Saturn's rulership, and then they're all going to move into Aquarius by February, and they're going to be under Saturn's rulership, and then into Pisces under Jupiter's rulership. There's something for this last month of this year into the first few months of 2026 that still has this overlay of Jupiter and Saturn that feels very, very significant that is emphasized even more.
Yeah, it actually continues kind of on in through I'm gonna pull it up, but basically when Jupiter comes into Leo, which ironically, or not ironically, but coincidentally is still part of that Mars retrograde path, it's going to be trining Saturn in Aries, of course.
Yeah.
So it definitely becomes a really powerful continued collaboration between the two. And it actually becomes like I think that trine just lasts for like several months. It's basically from March to July 2027. It's like and it goes exact within 0 degrees twice. And we'll have the sun in Aries, and it's just like a really fabulous little time. Then the sun comes all the way through to Leo. So
Hmm.
I think their continued synastry is really important here.
Hmm.
Oh, for sure. I think we have what should hopefully be a bright spring ahead of us with Jupiter stationing direct in the end of, or no, that's mid-March. It's like March 10th. And then I just had to pull my reference and look it up in my good old honeycomb. When in 2026 does Jupiter enter Leo? I did not know off the top of my head. It's June 30th. Oh,
It the The movement of, yeah, Jupiter into Leo will be interesting because Jupiter is going to really stitch up around this Cancer area of Mars's retrograde, but not get to the Leo portion of it until 2026 and only cover that once. I don't think Jupiter is going to retrograde back that far. So, um, that's basically what we have here with for my friends. I think to sum up, you guys, what since Sagittarius feels like for this year at least to be kind of the capstone. There's a little bit of movement into Capricorn, but that really takes us into the beginning of next year. Just any last thoughts on Sagittarius as a sign and just kind of how that might be a punctuation mark on at least this chapter of the story, or how this might end this chapter of the story.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, last year's Sagittarius season all happened in opposition to Jupiter and Gemini, so I think by comparison, it's certainly more empowered. And again, I think that is actually kind of a helpful aversion. Like Jupiter is trining Saturn, Jupiter is obviously exalted. I would gladly take Jupiter exalted in aversion in a supportive aspect with Saturn over in opposition and detriment. Like, even though I guess Hellenistically that would be preferable. But I feel like this is just like an exciting little fire period right here, thinking about the way even like Liz Green talks about the fire signs as not needing any justification for the way that they feel. It feels like that empowered Jupiter is going to like have that Sagittarius area really expressive and empowered to just exist, not in an overly intellectualized way, not in the way where you're neurotically going over every detail, just this expression. And I think Venus and Mars alone, or either of those two with the sun alone, would kind of underscore that, but them kind of orbiting each other and the sun, I think it's going to be a really powerful time for that kind of expression.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I am not mad about this aversion at all. I think all of these, just to really reiterate what everyone else has already said, I mean, these planets, Sagittarius is a sign that pushes us forward, right? It pushes us toward the light. You can see a little glimmer, right? And so but there's this way that when Jupiter in Sagittarius is chasing the light, like that's all we can see. And so I think the fact that Jupiter is retrograde here actually is quite a blessing, right? We're not going to burn too hot too fast where we fizzle out, right? This is about sustained growth and again to bring back that word of integration, right? That's what's happening here.
Yeah, I agree. I think as the card carrying Sagittarius of the group, I first of all support all these lovely statements about Sagittarius. I will also say, years ago, I was conclude with this when I was first studying with Adam, and he brought up something that I had never put together with Sagittarius before, which was that it's the darkest sign of the year. Duh. I just didn't see that in the night, in the Northern Hemisphere light cycle that we use for symbolism. And that there's also can be a great deal of nihilism in Sagittarius in its
Mm-hmm.
dark side. And I will say it a lot, and I hear my Sagittarius clients say it a lot, my Sagittarius friends say, what's the point? And that has two sort of balancing points with Sagittarius. What's the point can feel nihilistic, like, well, what's the use? What's the meaning of anything? It's too much, it's too overwhelming. But what's the point can also mean like, well, what's the purpose? Why am I in this? And one of the things that was helpful that when I was working with Adam, this was back in like 2017 now, he was like, Sagittarius won't get into anything, like a relationship, a job, whatever, unless it has meaning, unless it has purpose to it, unless it has a sense of order and it creates something bigger for them in their life. It creates a sense of order in their life. And I think that during this time, particularly in December, it would be so important to look at if, like you said, Alexandra, like, man, this stuff can, when you're working through the ancestral stuff, can be hard and you're slogging a lot of the time and it requires a lot of support. It can be easy sometimes to be pulled down into like, this is too much. It's too overwhelming. It's too much of this. But it's also like, but does this give me a clearer sense of purpose? On the other side of the coin, on turning the jewel around, does this give me a greater sense of clarity and meaning? Does this give me in my own personal life that is fueled by what I have come through and what the people before me have come through? Um, it's just an interest. I think it could be a very interesting sort of scales to be watching around this time between those types of ideas. So. Love this. Love this. All right.
I'm
Anything else
just
to,
happy
yeah,
that, yeah, sorry, I'm jumping
go,
in. I'm
go.
just happy that, in the midst of what could be a heavy eclipse season, right? We're able to step back, gain perspective, look at what we're working with, right, through the rest of the year and, offer some, again, perspective on like, what the heck this is all for, you know? And I know we're all like eclipse season, eclipse season, eclipse season right now. So thank you, Alex, for like a little bit of a breath of fresh air to like, I don't know, like let's just talk about Jupiter.
Let's talk about Jupiter, and you guys come back in mid-October and we'll be talking about how to make the most of those water trines. I'm
Oh
sure we're going to be
yeah.
talking about that a lot. Yeah, thanks, Alex. This has been really fun. It's always just so great to talk about these planets where people have this strong sense of like, I thought that the world was going to open up and give me flowers on this day. And it's like your comment about what's the point is like, if you want to know the meaning of life, are you willing to sit and wrestle with what is the point as a question for 10
Yeah.
years? Because that's what Jupiter wants for you.
And in October, I'll bring my paper mache and we'll all do art projects together.
Yes,
Come through and do it.
yes.
We'll also look at, I think in October for my thing, we'll look at a famous Libra too, because we'll get back on that. We've just done so much Virgo in the last few episodes, my friends, that I was like, we can't do a Virgo celebrity because we're just going to be talking about Virgo so much. We wanted to bring in something a little fresh and especially with the heaviness of eclipses, like you were saying, Whitney, like something that feels a little hopeful. And Jupiter, yeah, sometimes isn't ostensibly subjectively always feeling comfortable, but it's usually about bringing things back to some kind of meaning and coherence, or at least the search, man's search for meaning would be a very Jupiter type of title. So, thank you all for coming back to the weekend news desk here, as we like to say. Before we go, where can everybody find y'all?
I am the number 9 lives astrology at Instagram, YouTube.com. And you can book a reading with me there. I'm also doing an 8-week mentorship with my friend Sarah Posh. We are currently running a wait list for that one. I've got a few other things cooking, so go check me out.
I love it. And you can find me at astro.arcana.astrology on Instagram and YouTube and at astroarcana.com to book a reading.
And you can find me at what am I? What's my
Who am I?
Where are you
website?
at? Just love that you like sighed at yourself. You find me.
Me. You can find me at me.
Just find me.
Said the Leo Rising. At www.alexamorosi.com. You can book readings, energy healing with me there. You can also go in and book. I have a ton of services. So if you want to book a quick call with me, that's also on the website. It's free. You can just figure out what the best service would be for you. And thank you all for showing up again for our weekend wisdom series. And we will see you all next next week. Bye bye.
Next week. Bye.